Today, we are diving deep into the absolutely brutal world of Roman justice. And trust me, if you think you know about crime and punishment, well, you're in for a surprise. Because in ancient Rome, the system was so extreme, you will not believe who actually faced the most dangerous fate of all. So let's just jump right in with a question for you. What do you think was the single most dangerous job in ancient Rome? Maybe a gladiator, right? Or a soldier fighting on the frontier. Well, hang on to that thought, because the answer is probably not what you're thinking. To figure out the answer, we actually have to start at the bottom. We need to look at how regular people were punished, because this was an era of truly, truly brutal justice. You see, the Roman system wasn't just about punishment. It was about sending a very loud, very clear message. And Roman punishments, you'll see, were often deeply symbolic. Let's take the crime of parricide. That's killing a close family member. To the Romans, this was so unthinkable, such an attack on the very fabric of society, that it got its own special punishment, the most feared death in the entire empire, known simply as the penalty of the sack. And the details of this are just pure, ritualistic horror. First, they would take a live dog, a monkey, a snake, and a rooster, and stuff them all into a big leather sack. Then, the person who committed the crime was sewn inside with them. And finally, the whole thing was just thrown into a river to sink. So what about crimes against the state itself? Something like treason. Well, that punishment was just as public and just as brutal. Traitors were marched to the top of the Tarpeian Rock, which is this steep cliff overlooking the Roman Forum, and they were simply flung off the edge. And get this, in the very, very unlikely chance that you actually survived that fall, there was no escape. Men were literally waiting at the bottom, with one job: to make sure you didn't get up again. They were determined to see the sentence through. Justice was also tailored to the person. The Vestal Virgins, for example, were these high priestesses who took a sacred vow of celibacy. If a Vestal Virgin broke that vow, her punishment was incredibly symbolic: a living burial. She'd be placed in a small underguard room with just a lamp, a little bit of bread, and some water, and then sealed in to die of suffocation. And, the list of these grimly creative punishments just goes on and on. People accused of being poisonous sorcerers, and at different points in history, Christian women could face a terrifying death in the arena, tied to a stake and devoured by hungry lions for public entertainment. Okay, so we've seen these elaborate, brutal public punishments for regular people, but that brings us to the very top. What happens when the most powerful person in the known world, the emperor himself, fails? What could justice possibly look like for him? Well, an emperor's crime wasn't something you'd find in a law book. It was way more subjective. The crime was simply being a bad emperor. And what did that mean? It could be anything from a massive military defeat to bankrupting the state, or, and this was the big one, making the powerful Praetorian Guard angry. Any of those could be a death sentence. And the punishment for this crime? It wasn't a cliff. It wasn't a sack full of animals. It wasn't lions in the Colosseum. No, it was swift, it was personal, and it was brutally direct. Execution by dagger. The kind of weapon used in conspiracies, in betrayals that happen up close and personal. All right, I want you to look at this number. Just 30. What in the world do you think that represents when we're talking about Roman emperors? It means this: of the 33 Roman emperors who were assassinated, 30 of them were stabbed to death. That is a staggering 90%. This became so common, especially during a period called the Crisis of the 3rd century, that for the average Roman, an emperor's death meant terror. It meant that a civil war and total chaos were probably right around the corner. And this brings us right back to that question I asked at the beginning. As one historian puts it, this shocking reality makes, quote, the job of Roman emperor statistically one of the most lethal occupations in history. Way, way more dangerous than being a soldier, a gladiator, or even a common criminal. And when you think about it, this whole thing reveals a massive, massive irony. The ultimate power in the Roman world came with the ultimate risk. Let's just compare the two kinds of justice we've seen. So here's the paradox right here. For a normal citizen, justice was a huge public show. Cliffs, sacks, lions. It was the state flexing its absolute power for everyone to see. But for the emperor,
It was the total opposite. A quick, quiet assassination, usually behind closed doors in a palace conspiracy. The citizen was punished by the state for a specific crime. The emperor was punished with a simple dagger for the vague crime of just failing.
Which leaves us with one final big question to think about. In the Roman world, where power was supposed to be absolute, was that power actually a shield that protected you? Or was it really just a giant target painted on your back?